Donald Trump has told a rally at a U.S. steel plant in Pennsylvania that he intends to double U.S. steel import tariffs to 50%.
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Coca-Cola, one of the world's most iconic brands, is now grappling with the fallout from President Donald Trump's decision to double tariffs on steel and aluminum, from 25% to 50%. The move has thrust the global soda giant into the heart of a growing trade war, triggering a cascade of challenges. Rising production costs, strained supply chains, and mounting pressure on global operations.
Coca-Cola CEO says it may ramp up use of plastic bottles and raise prices due to President Trump's 25% tariff on aluminum imports.
Coca-Cola now has to rethink its packaging strategy while balancing environmental responsibility, pricing pressures, and consumer trust, keeping it all packed into a single can.
They cited uncertainty with the consumer and how that's led to trade downs and different decisions. Are you seeing that?
Certainly, we're seeing some disruption for consumers around the world. I think it's very important to recognize that some of the need for affordability didn't just start in 2025. Inflation was a factor for the last few years.
But how long can Coca-Cola absorb the heat without passing it on to consumers? And can America's most beloved brand survive its most radical changes yet? On June 4, 2025, President Donald Trump reignited global trade tensions by doubling tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50%, citing national security under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The move, which exempted only the UK, was framed as a bold play to revive U.S. manufacturing. But the ripple effects reached far beyond the steel mills. The market reaction was immediate and severe. The Midwest Aluminum Delivery Premium, a key benchmark for U.S. aluminum pricing, spiked by over 54% in a single day, hitting record highs of 62 to 64 cents per pound, approximately $1,377 to $1,393 per metric ton. The premium has surged more than 160% since early 2025, reflecting rapidly rising import costs and strained supply chains. That spike slammed into companies that rely heavily on aluminum, such as automotive, construction, packaging, and especially the beverage industry. For Coca-Cola, where aluminum cans are the lifeblood of global distribution, the impact was immediate and costly. And this wasn't just a materials problem. Nearly 44% of aluminum in the U.S. comes from imports, much of it from Canada, Coke's top supplier. When that flow gets pinched, the ripple hits everything from bottling lines to your corner store fridge. Turns out the real cost of your soda isn't sugar, it's international trade friction. While the administration frames the policy as a strategic effort to restore American industrial strength, critics argue it may distort global commodity markets, exacerbate inflation, and invite retaliatory trade measures from key allies including Canada and the European Union. This latest tariff hike underscores a broader shift. U.S. industrial policy is entering a more assertive and unpredictable phase with global economic consequences. To understand how tariffs ripple through the economy, start with a soda can. Coca-Cola produces billions of beverages annually, with a massive portion packaged in aluminum cans. But these cans aren't just containers, they're part of the company's identity and a finely tuned global supply chain. As of 2023, about 44% of aluminum used in the U.S. was imported, much of it from Canada, Coca-Cola's top supplier. That flow matters. The company's manufacturing efficiency relies on predictable, affordable access to this material. Aluminum cans are durable, recyclable, and widely preferred by consumers, making them perfect for Coke's logistics and brand strategy. They're also central to Coke's cost efficiency and brand image. When tariffs push aluminum prices higher, it's not just a budget line item, it's a disruption to the company's entire operational rhythm. And for a product that's been sold in the same iconic shape for over 50 years, just switch materials isn't as easy as it sounds. The effects of the tariff increase hit Coca-Cola almost instantly, with aluminum costs surging due to elevated delivery premiums and restricted imports. Production budgets tightened across Coca-Cola's operations. The Can Manufacturers Institute warned of a ripple effect, a projected 9–15% rise in canned beverage costs across the industry. For Coca-Cola, this translated into higher per-unit expenses, up to 30 cents more per can. Retailers began renegotiating contracts and internal teams scrambled to adjust sourcing strategies. Consumers, meanwhile, started to notice creeping price increases on grocery store shelves. The once stable supply chain was destabilized, putting stress on operations from bottling to distribution. The fallout wasn't just economic, it was strategic. With aluminum costs surging, Coca-Cola acted fast to limit the damage. The first move, evaluating moderate price increases. Not ideal, but necessary to maintain margins in a market where every cent counts. Simultaneously, executives began considering a partial shift from aluminum cans to PET plastic bottles, an option that offered immediate cost relief and fewer supply constraints. But the trade-off wasn't simple. PET bottles, while cheaper and easier to source, posed a challenge to Coca-Cola's long-standing sustainability image. The brand has built much of its modern identity on recyclable aluminum. A return to plastic, even temporarily, raised concerns about consumer perception and environmental impact. Behind the scenes, logistics teams analyzed how production lines and packaging infrastructure would need to change, while marketing prepared for the risk of public backlash. After all, no one says eco-conscious like a global brand explaining why it's using more plastic. Meanwhile, Coca-Cola's policy teams increased their presence in Washington, lobbying for exemptions, rollbacks, or at least a phased tariff implementation. The point wasn't to resist change, but to secure breathing room, enough time to adjust operations without undermining the brand's legacy or supply chain stability. The strategy was less about cans or bottles and more about adapting quickly without losing consumer trust or operational control. For Coca-Cola, switching from cans to plastic isn't just a supply chain tweak, it's messing with a classic. The iconic red and white can isn't just packaging, it's part of Coca-Cola's identity. That crisp aluminum crack has been tied to refreshment for generations. So when the company considered shifting more production to PET bottles, it wasn't just about saving money, it risked breaking a bond with consumers built on nostalgia and consistency. Generations of consumers associate the crack of opening a can with refreshment and tradition. Changing that could alienate longtime fans and disrupt customer loyalty. The move also risks undermining Coca-Cola's marketing campaigns built on nostalgia and sustainability. While a plastic bottle may solve short-term cost issues, it could weaken long-term emotional connections with consumers. The brand was now caught in a balancing act between economic necessity and identity preservation. One of Coca-Cola's toughest calls was whether to pass rising aluminum costs on to consumers. Even minor increases, say 20 or 30 cents per can, can trigger real pushback, especially with household budgets already stretched. In a price-sensitive category like soda, loyalty only goes so far. Coca-Cola had to evaluate how much pricing power it truly held. Would die-hard Coke drinkers absorb the hike, or would they drift toward cheaper store brands, or worse, Pepsi? Past case studies showed that loyalty has limits, particularly when wallet pressure mounts. Coca-Cola needed to strike a delicate balance, protecting profit margins without alienating the very consumers who made it a global icon. As Coca-Cola scrambled to respond, a bigger problem surfaced. There simply wasn't enough domestic aluminum to meet demand. Even if every idle U.S. smelter fired back up, output would still fall short, according to the Aluminum Association. In 2023, nearly half of the U.S. aluminum supply came from imports, with Canada being the dominant trade partner. The sudden tariff surge didn't come with a plan to bridge that gap. Instead, it exposed the fragility of America's industrial backbone. Transport delays, limited smelting capacity, and high energy costs made domestic aluminum less competitive and less accessible. For Coca-Cola, this created a choke point in the supply chain, one that no amount of brand strength could overcome without fast, adaptive action. But Coca-Cola isn't the only company caught in this tariff storm. Across the beverage and food industries, the ripple effects have been significant. Craft breweries, many of which rely heavily on aluminum cans and operate on tight margins, are facing existential threats. With smaller production volumes and less pricing power, they struggle to absorb rising costs or renegotiate supplier contracts. Similarly, companies like Campbell's and Del Monte, which depend on canned packaging for soups and vegetables, are also being squeezed. As aluminum prices rise, so do grocery store prices, directly affecting consumers. The broader lesson: in today's globalized economy, a disruption in one material can set off a domino effect, reaching industries and products most consumers take for granted. The United States' decision to hike steel and aluminum tariffs rattled more than just domestic markets. It drew swift condemnation from major trade partners. Canada, Mexico, and the EU blasted the move as a violation of trade norms, with Canada threatening retaliatory tariffs on American goods. These countries argue that the tariffs violate global trade norms and worsen inflationary pressures at a critical time. The World Trade Organization, WTO, may become the next battleground as legal challenges to the Section 232 tariffs gain traction. Back home, U.S. industry groups like the Can Manufacturers Institute and National Beverage Association are stepping up lobbying efforts, urging Washington to reconsider or at least grant sector-specific exemptions. The irony, a measure meant to shield U.S. metal producers, may end up bruising soda prices and diplomacy in one blow, fueling both domestic discontent and international trade tension. Tariffs may promise job protection, but the economic ripple often hits in places few policymakers expect, like your soda can. While the intent behind the tariff hike was to protect U.S. jobs in steel and aluminum production, the broader reality is more complicated. A 2019 Federal Reserve study of similar measures showed that while metal producers saw short-term gains, downstream industries like manufacturing, packaging, and food processing suffered job losses due to rising input costs. For Coca-Cola, every cent added to aluminum prices cuts into capital that could otherwise support hiring, R&D, or expansion. Smaller companies feel the strain even more. Without the scale to absorb the extra costs, many are left choosing between layoffs or survival. What's saved in one sector is often lost in another. It's the economic equivalent of plugging a leak in one pipe while cracking open another. To manage costs, Coca-Cola has considered shifting more packaging from aluminum cans to PET plastic bottles. Financially, it makes sense. Plastic is cheaper and more available, but environmentally it's a step backward. Aluminum is highly recyclable with strong recovery rates. PET, on the other hand, too often ends up in landfills, or worse, oceans. For a brand that has long championed sustainability, this shift could invite criticism from both consumers and environmental groups. Years of green messaging could be undermined by one cost-saving move. Coca-Cola now faces a real dilemma: cut costs or uphold its environmental commitments, a decision that may shape both public perception and long-term brand equity. The tariff hike is as much a political statement as it is an economic strategy. President Trump has framed the move as a bold stand for American workers, especially those in struggling steel and aluminum towns. It's a message that resonates with parts of his base ahead of the 2026 midterms, but the broader optics are mixed. While a handful of smelters may benefit, thousands of jobs in downstream industries like beverages, food, and manufacturing are now at risk. Economists warn that these measures prioritize symbolism over strategy. The administration's protectionist approach is drawing both praise and criticism, depending on where you sit in the supply chain. For companies like Coca-Cola, navigating this politicized landscape means balancing economic decisions with public relations and doing so under the spotlight of national debate. What started as a pricing problem has become a turning point in how Coca-Cola plans for the future. Beyond short-term cost cuts and tariff lobbying, Coca-Cola is making deeper strategic moves. The company is exploring reshoring parts of its supply chain, forging joint ventures with North American aluminum producers, and investing in alternative packaging, like plant-based or biodegradable materials. Coca-Cola is also considering expanded partnerships with environmental NGOs to offset reputational risk if plastic use increases. From a branding perspective, the company may double down on storytelling, using nostalgia, innovation, and eco-conscious messaging to maintain consumer trust. It's a delicate strategy. Stabilize operations, align with sustainability goals, and ensure the brand evolves without losing its identity. For Coca-Cola, this isn't just damage control. It's a roadmap for resilience in an era of economic volatility. Coca-Cola's experience offers a blueprint and a warning for other companies navigating today's volatile trade environment. First, it underscores the importance of supply chain diversification. Over-reliance on a single material or import source can create outsized vulnerability in the face of policy changes. Second, it highlights the value of agility, whether through pricing strategy, packaging alternatives, or stakeholder communication. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it shows how brand equity and public trust are just as critical as cost efficiency. Companies that fail to consider how operational decisions affect consumer perception risk long-term damage. In an interconnected global economy, resilience means thinking several moves ahead. The tariff era may just be beginning, and those who adapt fastest will lead the next chapter of corporate survival. As the aluminum saga unfolds, Coca-Cola's next moves will echo across corporate America. Will the brand preserve its legacy or reinvent itself entirely? What would you do in their shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the economics shaping our world. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious.